You're listening to WRUU-LP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul.
Check, check, 1, 2. Look like a little country, some rock and roll and blues. 'Cause we sure love playing for good people like you. Let me know if you can hear me. Check, check, 1, 2.
Welcome to Music Local and Sustainable, the radio show that features discussions with and the music of local musicians. I am your host, Dave Lake. It gives me great pleasure to welcome jazz keyboardist and composer Eric Jones. Eric is not only a jazz performer and composer, he's a faculty member at Savannah State University. Welcome, Eric Jones.
Thank you.
Why perform jazz of all the different forms of music?
That's a good question. I relate to jazz probably better than other types of music. My background is one of the reasons because I started by playing improvisational music at a young age, even though I didn't play jazz. When I started playing piano, I was playing by ear, and that led to playing in the church, which 100% of the music is improv. So I think jazz was a natural progression in what I wanted to do as a musician. Even though I did eventually start to study piano, it just seems like a natural progression for what I wanted to do once I decided to do music. And I guess I caught the jazz bug, like a lot of musicians have said. I mean, the terminology of catching the jazz bug is you hear something maybe on the radio or you see a performance, it changes your life. And I think that's what happened to me. For me, what happened, I studied with a piano teacher that was a jazz musician, and he really exposed me to different types of music, particularly jazz. And basically, I just was bitten by it.
Are there particular jazz performers or jazz composers that you are particularly taken with?
Oh, yeah. I can start from my earliest inspiration. On piano, probably the first person that really inspired me and scared me at the same time was Art Tatum. I was in college when I first heard of Art Tatum, and I picked up a documentary on jazz piano. And when I saw Art Tatum play, it was a small snippet, but it was enough to scare me from playing the instrument. And then when I realized that he was legally blind, it blew me away. I never seen anybody play the way he played. Oscar Peterson was another one. But as I got older and I started digging into the music and starting to understand a lot of the history of the music, I was turned on to Bud Powell, Bill Evans, Keith Jarrett, Chick Corea, Herbie Hancock, which is like my all-time favorite artist. He's probably the biggest inspiration. Those are the ones that I can think just right off bat that they made a inspiration on what I do or the way I think about music, I think. And as well as not just piano, but Miles Davis, Charlie Parker, Wayne Shorter.
What about Art Tatum scared you?
I never seen anybody play so fast. I think Oscar Peterson said, when he first heard Art Tatum, his dad turned him on to Art Tatum, and he thought it was multiple people playing the piano. He thought it was two pianists playing at the same time. I had the same effect. When I heard Art Tatum, I couldn't believe it was one person playing that much piano. And I was like, how did he do it? And I saw a video of him playing. It just looked like it was unreal. It looked like it was an old video, but they could have put CGI and applied some effects on it because the way he moved, virtuosity, he's the epitome of it. And of course, Oscar Peterson is another one too. So I was like, man, I can never play like that. Even though I tried.
And it seems to be quite a wide variety because when I think of Art Tatum, I think of the same thing. He must be paid by the note.
Yeah.
because of all the notes he plays. But then you look at Herbie Hancock or Bud Powell, and not that they don't play a lot of notes, but it's more expressive. At least to me, it's more expressive, more emotional, more organic.
Yeah.
And so your combination of pianists seems to really do the whole spectrum.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, I think what happens is, as a musician, and not only with jazz, but just any type of improvisational music, and I would probably even say even classical musicians too, you kind of evolve as a person. And as you evolve as a person, you evolve as a musician. So when I started listening to jazz, my idea of jazz was a certain time period. Because as a kid, I kind of had some idea of jazz, but I thought of jazz was something that was antiquated, just for a particular time. And so as I start to really get into the music and understand the music, the first artists that I was exposed to were some of the older artists, like Art Tatum. And even before Art Tatum, I mean, some of the stride pianists, J.P. Johnson, William Delaney. And then as I started to uncover the layers of the music and realized that, man, this music is varied. There's so much diversity in the music. I think I was starting to find, quote unquote, my voice in the music, because with especially Herbie and everything he represents, and even Miles Davis, is not only updated, but also this idea of being open to the possibilities of whatever can happen. And I think that's, to me, the thing that I find attractive in his playing, the way that we're playing improvised music, and we do have melody, we have harmony that's written out, but that's only a kind of like a map. It's not a destination. So those guys were the ones that it resonated with me because of the fact of the philosophy around it, like the possibilities of let's play a song and let's see what happens. And I think Art Tatum was for a particular time in what he did, and he was ahead of his time. But once you get to a point where you say, okay, well, I appreciate and I love his playing, I love Oscar Peterson playing too, what resonates with me the most? And to me, it was just a personal thing. I think understanding the lineage of the instrument is really important.
One thing about Herbie Hancock that I'm so impressed by is the wide variety of expression
Yes.
that he gives.
Yes.
I fell in love with Herbie Hancock with Maiden Voyage.
Yeah.
But then he did these rock things, like Rocket.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
He's had a couple recent albums. One is Possibilities.
Yes.
And the other is Imagine.
Imagine. Yeah.
Where he's been working with other artists. And he brings out of those other artists my favorite songs.
Yeah.
I'm not a Christina Aguilera fan, but his performance with Christina Aguilera on the Possibilities album, they did A Song for You.
Yeah.
I keep listening to that.
Yeah.
On that same album, he does a thing with Johnny Lang, who's the blues singer.
Yeah. Well, I think because of my generation, I'm a child of the 80s. And when I started the piano, I didn't start out playing acoustic music. I was playing electric music. And I think one of the appeals of Herbie is the fact of that he plays so many different types of music. I think a lot of times why a lot of musicians today, and especially younger musicians, love Herbie and even Chick and all of those guys because of the fact of that they said, okay, it's okay to be a jazz musician and to appreciate other types of music and not have these biases to different types of music. So with Herbie, like you said, the expressiveness of his playing, I mean, when I hear Herbie, I hear Bartok, I hear Ravel, I hear Bud Powell, I hear Bill Evans, of course, I hear Oscar Peterson. It's such a varied of different types of styles, and I think that really plays into how amazing as a musician he is because of the fact that you can't pinpoint him from one particular place. As a musician, I play all types of music. Jazz is only one part of it, but jazz resonates with me the most. But I can identify with somebody like Herbie because of the fact of that he plays with different people and he's not so caught up in the differences. He's caught up in what connects us as people. So when it comes to music, to me, he makes everybody that he's worked with sounds better, in my opinion. And it was funny. Rocket was one of the first songs I've heard of Herbie when I was a kid. I didn't even know it was him. And I grew up in the hip hop culture, so I remember guys breakdancing in the middle of the street to Rocket. And I didn't realize that I was listening to a jazz artist as a kid until many years later. I was like, wow, I was already somewhat hip to Herbie. I didn't even know it.
I see in you, too, a lot of that versatility.
Yeah.
Because you love jazz, you're a jazz composer, but the most recent thing I saw you in was backing up a couple blues singers. Yeah. And one was sort of rock and rollish blues,
yeah,
and the other was more classic American songbook,
yeah,
classic jazz standards.
Yeah.
So I've seen you sort of rock out, I've seen you cool jazz, and I've seen you with more standards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I see that Herbie Hancock influence.
Yeah, yeah. It's a big influence, and I think sometimes I used to think, man, I wish I was, maybe I feel like an old soul. I could have been born in a different time where jazz was like really the thing, but I'm happy to be born in this time where I discovered the music at a maybe a later age, but I think it opens up a lot of different possibilities of different types of music. And I think the biggest thing about Herbie, and I think this comes from Miles Davis too, I can't just say Herbie without Miles, is the fact of the idea of being curious. And for me, as a kid, I always been curious about everything. I wanted to know the why behind everything. When it came to music, I always wanted to know other styles of music. I like this type of music. Everybody like this type of music. I like this type of music that's different from everybody else, going against the grain. And I think that's the thing that resonates with me with Herbie's playing, his approach to music, probably ultimately his approach to life, from the interviews that I've read and one of the books that he's written, this curiosity and being fascinated, about life. And I think it comes into the music. So I think when it comes to playing some blues, heavy blues, or trying to get rid of those biases against that type of music, because some jazz musicians and even people that listen to jazz, sometimes they can have somewhat of an elitist idea of what music is and how it should sound. And sometimes you have to fight against that. Don't get caught up in the cerebral of jazz music, but it's also about the feeling too as well.
Do you have a definition of jazz?
Oh man, that's a tough one. Duke Ellington says if you have to define it, what jazz is, you don't know what it is, or something like that. But I guess if I could put it in words, I would say first it's improvisational music. I do believe that jazz do have certain attributes of the music that defines jazz. The music is a marriage between African music and European music. It has the blues influence in it. One thing is I try not to get to a point where I want to take out certain ingredients that have made jazz what it is. It's birthed out of the blues, birthed out of the work songs, the spirituals, as well as the composers like Ravel, Gershwin. It's birthed out of all of those things. But if I were to give a definition, I would say it's improvisational music. It's American classical music, and it's evolving too. Sometimes it swings, sometimes it doesn't.
I guess I'm food oriented, and so I think of it as a casserole.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
It's got a lot of ingredients.
Yes.
And often it's hard to define what those ingredients are.
It is, yeah.
But the final product is so delicious.
It's so delicious. It's like in New Orleans, that's where the birthplace of jazz. So you think about the food. I always like to compare music to food anyway. I'm a foodie myself, and sometimes I like to cook. So I like to compare music to food, because you think about the culture of New Orleans and what was going on during the time in Congo Square. That reflects in the music, and it's just all of these different ingredients that came into creating jazz, that comes in and creating a gumbo or a casserole or something of that nature too.
Earlier on, you said that one of your early influences was playing in the church.
Yes.
Where much of what you're playing was improvisational.
Yes.
How was it improvisational?
Well, I tell you, here's a good example of it. I went to a quote-unquote holiness church, which was, nowadays they say Pentecostal church, where people don't mind speaking in tongues and shouting and dancing, and it's loud, very exciting for some and probably scary for others. I guess it depends on where you come from. But one of the things that they would have, when it comes to one of the parts of the program, was the devotional service, where somebody would get up and sing a song. And as a pianist, you didn't know what song they were going to sing. Nothing was planned. Not even the songs themselves. It was really depends on the person that want to get up and sing. And then they would usually have two people do devotional service, which they would sing songs. And so they would just sing songs, and you had to find the key. You had to figure it out. And if I had $1 for every time somebody sung a song that I didn't know, I'd probably be rich, because they'll just start singing and then you had to find the key and you just try to make it up as you go along. Some of the stuff that I do is not a natural thing. I have a natural ability to kind of make up stuff. I think that came from practicing. I didn't know I was practicing improvisation at the time, but when I think back to it, it was. And sometimes they demanded a certain amount of excellence too when it came to that. Even though everything was loose, there was no excuses for not being able to pick up a song, as they would say. So it was kind of like School of the Hard Knocks, because if you couldn't cut it, if you couldn't figure out the song, or even if you didn't know the song, at least provide some type of accompaniment to the song, a lot of times they will let you know you're not ready for it. So it was a tough job being a pianist and having to figure out, okay, what's the chord progression to this particular song based on the melody that they're singing. And some people wasn't good singers as well. So you just had to pray and make sure, make it sound as decent as possible.
As they change keys in mid-song.
As they change keys in mid-songs, sometimes multiple keys. And so I think those are the foundational things that came out of what I even do today, even though I don't really play a lot of that type of music, but it's some of those concepts of being quick to improvise.
Well, why don't we hear a song?
Okay, yeah. I'll play like a jazz standard. First song that comes to my head is Stella by Starlight.
when you put together something like that, how do you construct it?
One of the first things I try to do is try not to get in the way. And I try not to think. I try to just feel the music. And the reason why I say that, because in a performance, everything is spontaneous. So you just say, okay, what do I feel like doing? What direction do I feel like going? Sometimes you can't even articulate it. It really based on what you practice or what you listen to before you play in front of others. And that's where the work goes into, because that's the time where you can figure out, okay, if I'm working on something very technical, then I can spend time going over repetitiously, where when I do play, it'll be one of the tools that I can use to in a performance. But a lot of times, if you find yourself thinking too much when you're playing, then you don't capture the moment in a sincere way. And you find yourself practicing on the job instead of playing on the job. I have to constantly remind myself not to do that, because I think it's so easy to be critical of one's playing. As a musician, you constantly finding things that you want to work on and things you want to refine. So I don't really think of as much. I just say, okay, well, I guess let's just play something, hope for the best.
Now, when you do a jazz standard like that, do you typically use what's commonly referred to as straight ahead jazz, of doing the theme, doing your improvisation, then coming back to the theme?
Yeah, I think for the most part, if I'm doing something where if my plan is to connect to the audience, I want to spell the melody out where we know what you're playing, I would do that. And it really depends on the mood that I'm in. Sometimes if I feel like being really abstract and just doing something totally different, I may break the so-called rules of playing jazz, where you play the melody and then you improvise on the melody. I know in this case I kind of played the melody but just rubato without time, and then went into it. And a lot of times when I do something like that, it's my way of getting warmed up, not just diving right into it, and just getting my fingers warmed up and giving me time to figure out where I'm going to go with it. And a lot of times I don't think consciously where I'm going to go. I think a lot of musicians are the same way. You don't think consciously, I'm going to start going into some type of swing thing or whatever. It's just the fact of, if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
Now, you say you practice the components and you practice particular things.
Yeah.
What sort of things do you practice that you then later pull from?
Well, I like to say, what I usually do is think about concepts of different ideas. One concept that I've been dealing with is playing in odd meters, not playing in the typical 4/4 time, 2/4, 3/4, but something like a 5/4 or 7, something with 7 beats. And I know that's probably sounds pretty technical, but these are like certain grooves, you can call them, where you don't find in a lot of Western music, at least Western pop music. One song that I do, and I got the idea from African guitarist by the name of Lionel Loweke. He does a version of Skylark that's in 7. You can probably dance to it, but it's probably hard to dance to something that's in 7. I'll take a song like that and I say, okay, let me see if I can play in an odd meter. So that means I have to change the melody a little bit to fit that, and then have to figure out ways to maneuver, to improvise in that. Sometimes I'll practice something like that. As a piano player, there's a lot of possibilities to this instrument. And one of the things you can do is polyrhythms too, where you're playing multiple rhythms at the same time in each hand. One rhythm in the left hand, one rhythm in the right hand. And then a lot of what I do too is just listening too. Just listen to the music. Because to me, that's where the ideas come from. Listening to artists that you like and discovering new artists that you may not have heard and getting new ideas.
Can you give the listener an idea of the first example where you take a song and then you put it in an odd meter?
Yeah. So I do Skylark, and I'll give you a snippet of it. So if I were to play it the way people know it, so this is Skylark, the ballad, Johnny Mercer. So that's the melody, pretty simple. Everybody knows that. And that's in 1, 2, 3, So it's in 4/4 time. Now, if I say, okay, I want to change the rhythm to 7, it's going to be totally different. The way I usually do it is start out with somewhat of a bass line. Now, the rhythm and the tempo is different. The tempo is twice as fast as the ballad. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the ballad. But the tempo for this one in 7 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. And you have the rhythm that accompanies that. So here's Skylark in 7. So that's the concept of something that I do. And then another thing that I do too is kind of like polyrhythm. If I'm practicing my C major scale and I'm doing it the normal way where I'm just going. Well, this is what I've been doing lately, and it's going to be a little rusty, but is the idea of polyrhythms where you have quarter notes. And then you have this particular rhythm with the right hand. So when you put them together, you have that going on too. So that's kind of like the polyrhythmic approach that I'm working on. Those are concepts. Spending time on rhythm, a lot of time on rhythm. Yeah.
My first reaction is, how in the heck do you do that? I mean, I have a hard time clapping to a beat regularly, let alone each hand doing a completely different rhythm.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
It's really hard, and I'm nowhere where I want to be. One instrument that I'm fascinated with is drums. I've always been fascinated with rhythm. What I found out about the piano is because of instrument. So I want to treat it as such, and a lot of the pianists that I like, even composers that I like, whether it's classical, jazz, or whatever, they take advantage of rhythm. And I love music that encompasses different types of rhythm. So that was a direction that I wanted to spend time and try to work on. And it's a work in progress. As a piano player, so many possibilities with playing this instrument. Because a lot of times in jazz, you see the typical thing where you play chord changes with the left hand and you play melody in the right. But, okay, what else can you do? And especially when you're playing solo piano, you want to vary up different textures, different styles of playing so you can engage the audience. And it makes it interesting for yourself, too. And one of my favorite pianists he's very adept with his left hand is Brad Mehldau. To me, he's an icon. He's an original voice for my generation. Probably one of the last great original voices I've heard personally, you know. Yeah.
There are two pianists who I'm just amazed by what they can do improvisationally, and that's Brad Mehldau and Keith Jarrett.
Keith Jarrett, yeah.
Both of them can do a half an hour, and just do improvisation, and get so into the music.
Yes.
And to the point where they're humming along with it.
Yeah.
Some don't like that, but
yeah. I don't. When I hear that, I'm like, listen to what he's playing, though. You know, to me, that's like aesthetic. Glenn Gould hum when he plays. But yeah, you know, it's funny you mentioned Keith Jarrett, because Keith Jarrett is another influence of mine, and I always made this connection between Keith Jarrett and Brad Mehldau and their playing styles, because they have a lot of similarities, at least to me, and it feels like the way Brad Mehldau's approach to playing piano is similar to what Keith Jarrett was doing, because you can hear a lot of classical in his playing, particular a lot of Bach, and it's very contrapuntal, where he has a bass line going on along with the melody. He has these inner voices. And there's other piano players, jazz pianists, that does that too. But Keith Jarrett is one of the ones that, to me, I can hear a lot of Jarrett and Brad Mehldau's playing. And those two, when it comes to improvisation and being able to improvise where it sounds clear and organized, but yet spontaneous, I don't think nobody does it the way they do it.